Cleopatra VII was born in 69 BCE, in a city that dazzled the world. Alexandria, marble streets gleaming in the sun, markets alive with merchants from across the Mediterranean, ships bobbing in the harbor laden with exotic goods, and scholars debating the mysteries of the cosmos, was the beating heart of knowledge, wealth, and power. It was the ideal stage for a queen who would one day rule not just with authority, but with brilliance. But wealth alone does not secure survival. Cleopatra's family, the Ptolemies, were Greek rulers in an Egyptian kingdom, outsiders wearing the crowns of pharaohs. Their dynasty, born from Alexander the Great's conquests, had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. Yet they were perpetually under threat from internal strife, rival siblings, ambitious advisors, and the ever-expanding power of Rome. Power in the Ptolemaic court was fragile. Betrayal was common, murder not uncommon, and survival depended on wit as much as birthright. From her earliest years, Cleopatra understood that being royal did not guarantee authority. Her world was both luxurious and perilous. She witnessed plots in the palace corridors, whispered schemes in candlelit rooms, and the fragile dance of favor and fear that kept rulers alive. She learned to observe, to calculate, and to anticipate the moves of those around her. From a young age, she internalized a lesson that would guide her entire life. Intelligence and perception could be more powerful than armies. A mind ahead of her time, Cleopatra's education was extraordinary. Unlike most women of her era, she was encouraged to learn languages, philosophy, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and politics. Alexandria was full of libraries, schools, and scholars, and the young princess absorbed knowledge like a sponge. Languages became her tools of power. Cleopatra mastered Greek, the language of her court; Egyptian, the language of her subjects; Latin, the language of Rome, and several others. In an age when rulers often relied on interpreters, Cleopatra could converse directly with anyone, soldiers, priests, foreign dignitaries, and persuade them with her words. Her intellect was matched by her personality. Ancient sources, though often written by her enemies, describe a woman whose presence commanded attention. It was not merely her beauty that captivated people, but her voice, her confidence, and her wit. She could charm, inspire, intimidate, and negotiate, all without a single display of force. By her teenage years, Cleopatra was not only highly educated but politically astute, understanding the intricate web of alliances, debts, and ambitions that defined her world. Family, rivalry, and early politics. Cleopatra's childhood was dominated by court intrigue and sibling rivalry. The Ptolemies were notorious for internal conflict. Cousins, siblings, and advisors vied for influence, and Cleopatra witnessed betrayal, manipulation, and even assassination firsthand. Her father's reign was fraught with instability. Civil unrest, debt, and Roman pressure constantly threatened the dynasty. Cultural tensions also shaped her upbringing. The Ptolemies were Greek rulers over a largely Egyptian population. Cleopatra learned to navigate these worlds, respecting Egyptian traditions and religion while maintaining Greek customs for the court. She gained insight into both the hearts and minds of her subjects and the ambitions of her family. From these lessons, she developed a keen sense of strategy, diplomacy, and survival that would define her reign. Ascension to the throne. At 18, Cleopatra ascended the throne of Egypt alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. Her rule was immediately challenged by advisors who sought to control the throne. Within months, she was exiled. Most young rulers in exile fade from history, but Cleopatra did not. She watched, learned, and waited for the right moment to reclaim her power. Opportunity arrived with Julius Caesar. Pursuing his enemies in Egypt, Caesar entered Alexandria. Cleopatra seized the moment with audacity. According to legend, she was smuggled into his presence wrapped in a carpet. Whether true or symbolic, it demonstrated her courage and strategic flair. Their meeting was political, not romantic. Cleopatra offered Egypt's wealth, grain, and political loyalty. Caesar offered recognition. By morning, Cleopatra had regained her throne. She had proven that her power came from strategy, intelligence, and decisiveness, not merely birthright. Consolidating power. Once restored, Cleopatra ruled with vision and precision. She stabilized Egypt's economy, reformed taxation, and ensured the grain supply to prevent famine. Control of food meant control of loyalty and survival. She curbed corruption, restored confidence in her government, and demonstrated that her authority was grounded in competence. Her influence extended beyond politics. Cleopatra embraced Egyptian culture, presenting herself as the living embodiment of Isis, gaining legitimacy among priests and subjects. Alexandria flourished under her reign, becoming a hub of trade, learning, and culture. Scholars, merchants, and diplomats were drawn to her court, and she understood that knowledge, culture, and perception were as powerful as armies and gold. Cleopatra and Caesar. Cleopatra's alliance with Caesar secured Egypt's sovereignty and strengthened her own authority. She bore him a son, Ptolemy 15 Caesarion, solidifying her dynasty and linking Egypt's future with Rome. Her relationship with Caesar was political, a careful balance of diplomacy, perception, and strategic negotiation. Cleopatra positioned herself as Caesar's equal in intellect and influence. She managed alliances, negotiated treaties, and protected Egypt's independence, demonstrating that she could operate on the global stage with skill and foresight. The shadow of Caesar's assassination. The alliance between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar had been one of the most pivotal in the history of the ancient world. Egypt remained independent, her throne secured, and a son, Caesarion, linked the future of her kingdom to Rome. But as Rome's political intrigues reached their climax, Cleopatra's fortunes became entwined with events far from Alexandria. In 44 BCE, Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, was assassinated on the Ides of March by a group of senators led by Brutus, Cassius, and other conspirators. Cleopatra, far away in Egypt, learned of his death with shock and urgency. Caesar's murder plunged Rome into chaos, fracturing the power structure that had kept her kingdom secure. Allies turned on one another, armies mobilized, and Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, rose to prominence. Cleopatra faced a sudden and dangerous reality. The man who had protected her reign, guaranteed her son's future, and provided a powerful ally in the Mediterranean was gone. The political vacuum in Rome threatened Egypt's independence. Cleopatra realized that survival now depended not only on diplomacy but on careful calculation, swift action, and new alliances. Her response was emblematic of her intelligence and foresight. She observed the shifting allegiances among Rome's powerful figures, recognizing that Mark Antony, as a member of the Second Triumvirate, held the key to Egypt's continued sovereignty. Cleopatra began to forge a new strategy: align herself with Antony, rebuild influence, and ensure that Caesarion's claim could survive in a Rome no longer ruled by his father. The assassination also marked a personal moment of grief and reflection for Cleopatra. Caesar had been more than an ally. He had been a stabilizing presence, a partner in navigating a dangerous world, and the father of her son. Yet she allowed neither grief nor fear to cloud her judgment. Instead, she transformed crisis into strategy, proving once again that Cleopatra's brilliance was in her ability to act decisively when empires trembled. The death of Caesar was both an end and a beginning. The end of one alliance, the loss of a protector, and the beginning of Cleopatra's bold navigation of a new Roman reality, setting the stage for her next great alliance with Antony. Antony, Rome's eastern power. As Cleopatra grappled with the aftermath of Caesar's assassination, her attention turned to Mark Antony, one of Rome's most formidable generals and a member of the newly formed Second Triumvirate. Antony was a man of bold ambition, charisma, and military skill, qualities that mirrored Cleopatra's own. Where Caesar had been a stabilizing force, Antony represented both opportunity and risk. Antony was a man of contrasts. He was celebrated for his victories on the battlefield, his loyalty to Rome, and his ability to command armies. Yet he was also known for his flamboyance, his love of luxury, and his willingness to bend traditional Roman norms when it suited him. He had both enemies and allies within Rome, and his political position was strong but precarious. For Cleopatra, Antony represented a new path to safeguard Egypt. With Caesar gone, Rome was fractured, and Egypt's independence hung in the balance. By allying with Antony, she could secure protection for her throne and her son, Caesarion, influence the power dynamics of the Eastern Mediterranean, regain lost territories and extend Egypt's influence, counter the ambitions of Octavian, Caesar's heir, who would become her adversary. Cleopatra also understood Antony's psychology. He was ambitious but often swayed by charm and intelligence. She recognized that her knowledge, presence, and strategic insight could capture his attention and forge a partnership that benefited both leaders. Unlike Caesar, Antony's temperament allowed for negotiation, intrigue, and mutual advantage on a larger stage. Before their meeting, Cleopatra studied him carefully. She observed how he commanded respect among his troops, how he handled rivalries in Rome, and how he balanced loyalty and ambition. When the time came, Cleopatra approached Antony not merely as a foreign queen or seductress, but as an equal, a partner in strategy, and a sovereign whose kingdom could provide wealth, stability, and military advantage. In Antony, Cleopatra saw the continuation of her political vision, a Roman alliance that would secure Egypt's independence while allowing her to assert influence over the Eastern Mediterranean. This was not a romantic whim. It was calculated, deliberate, and daring, setting the stage for one of history's most legendary political and personal partnerships. Rome's fear and propaganda. Rome feared Cleopatra's intelligence, independence, and political skill. Octavian, Caesar's heir, launched a propaganda campaign portraying her as a dangerous seductress and foreign villain. Ancient sources twisted her story to make her ambition appear immoral. Despite this, Cleopatra continued to govern effectively, maintain loyalty, and protect Egypt. She understood that perception was a weapon, and that Rome's fear was a measure of her true power. The fall, the Battle of Actium, and the end of an era. Cleopatra's reign had been defined by intelligence, strategy, and daring alliances, but even the greatest minds cannot always control the tides of history. By 31 BCE, the stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the future of Egypt, but the balance of power across the entire Mediterranean. The rivalry between Mark Antony and Octavian had escalated into a full-scale war, and Cleopatra's fate became inseparable from Antony's. The decisive moment came at Actium, a narrow strait on the western coast of Greece. Antony commanded a fleet of warships, with Cleopatra's Egyptian navy in support. Octavian, determined to consolidate power in Rome and eliminate any threat to his supremacy, blockaded their forces with a disciplined and strategically superior fleet commanded by Agrippa. Cleopatra had spent years preparing for such a confrontation. Her ships were well-equipped, her sailors trained, and her tactics carefully considered. She understood the stakes. If Antony and she were defeated, Egypt's independence would vanish, and Octavian would claim their wealth and influence. Yet even with meticulous planning, the battle was fraught with uncertainty. The clash began with Antony's ships engaging Octavian's forces, cannon and catapult fire lighting the waters, and the cries of men and sailors echoing across the waves. Despite initial resistance, Antony's forces were gradually overwhelmed. Cleopatra made a fateful decision that would later be the subject of countless legends. She retreated with a portion of the fleet, leaving Antony's forces exposed. Some historians argue this was a tactical maneuver to preserve Egypt's strength. Others see it as a moment of calculated survival. Antony, upon witnessing Cleopatra's departure, initially attempted to follow, but confusion and desertions undermined the cohesion of his forces. The defeat at Actium shattered his army, and Antony's political power evaporated almost overnight. Cleopatra returned to Egypt, her mind racing with the implications. Their dreams of a Mediterranean empire were lost, Rome's power was unchallenged, and Octavian's shadow loomed ever larger. In Alexandria, Cleopatra faced a grim reality. Antony, wounded and despairing, soon took his own life, leaving Cleopatra as the last ruler of an independent Egypt. Yet even in the face of overwhelming defeat, she remained composed, resolute, and strategic. She knew that her final acts would define not only her legacy but the survival and dignity of her people. Rather than surrender to Octavian and face the humiliation of being paraded as a captive in Rome, Cleopatra prepared for death on her own terms. The queen who had once charmed Caesar and negotiated with Antony would now demonstrate the ultimate control over her own fate. Cleopatra's fall was not a collapse born of weakness. It was a masterful assertion of agency, a final act of sovereignty that ensured her story would endure beyond Rome's conquest. The Battle of Actium was more than a military defeat, it was the end of an era. Yet Cleopatra's resilience, foresight, and determination in the aftermath ensured that her life, her reign, and her legacy would continue to captivate history, art, and imagination for millennia. Death and sovereignty. Cleopatra's final act. Cleopatra had survived palace intrigue, exile, wars, and alliances with the most powerful men in the Mediterranean. Yet by 30 BCE, her world had narrowed to the walls of Alexandria. Octavian's forces advanced, and the might of Rome threatened to swallow the last independent kingdom in the eastern Mediterranean. For a ruler who had always controlled her destiny with intelligence and strategy, the question was no longer whether she would die, but how she would die. Octavian offered her terms: surrender and live, but only as a captive to be paraded in Rome. To Cleopatra, this was an unacceptable fate. She had lived her life as a sovereign, a queen, and a symbol of Egypt's enduring glory. To be reduced to a prize, a spectacle in a Roman triumph, was worse than death itself. Cleopatra resolved to maintain her dignity to the very end, a final assertion of autonomy and authority. The circumstances of her death have been debated for centuries. Ancient sources tell of her choosing to die by asp bite, possibly delivered by an Egyptian cobra, a symbol of royal power and divine protection. Others suggest a combination of poisons administered carefully to control the timing and manner of her passing. Regardless of the method, the act was deliberate, calculated, and symbolic. Cleopatra's death was a final strategy, a conscious refusal to surrender her legacy to her enemies. Her death also reflected her enduring political genius. By dying on her own terms, Cleopatra preserved the dignity of the Ptolemaic dynasty, refusing to become a Roman spectacle, maintained her image as a sovereign, not a conquered subject, controlling the narrative of her life even in death, ensured that her children, particularly Caesarion, would be remembered as heirs of a queen who had commanded empires, even if Rome eventually extinguished their rule. Cleopatra's death was not a defeat in the conventional sense. It was a masterful act of agency, turning the inevitability of Rome's conquest into a testament to her wisdom, courage, and foresight. Her body was said to have been discovered by loyal attendants, her passing mourned in Alexandria, yet the city itself surrendered to Octavian's forces soon after, marking the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty and Egypt's independence. Even in death, Cleopatra's story exerted power. Roman historians and later storytellers would debate her beauty, her ambition, and her intelligence. Yet those who study her carefully recognize a queen whose strategy, political acumen, and unwavering self-determination defined her life. She had ruled for over 20 years, preserved Egypt's independence longer than most thought possible, and died in a manner that ensured her legend could never be extinguished. Cleopatra's death marked the end of an era, the last pharaoh, the last Ptolemaic ruler, and one of history's most fascinating sovereigns. But it was also the final, defining chapter of a life lived with strategic brilliance, political courage, and conscious control over her own destiny. In choosing death over humiliation, Cleopatra ensured that history would remember her not as a conquered queen, but as a woman who had defied empires and refused to fade. Master of diplomacy, the art of influence. While Cleopatra's reign is often remembered for her high-profile relationships with Rome's leaders, her true genius lay in the subtle and relentless practice of diplomacy, a skill that extended far beyond personal alliances. From the moment she became queen, Cleopatra understood that Egypt's survival depended on maintaining influence across the Mediterranean, balancing regional powers, and navigating the delicate tensions within her own court. Cleopatra cultivated relationships with neighboring kingdoms, ensuring peace and cooperation along Egypt's borders. She skillfully negotiated trade agreements that strengthened Egypt's economy while preventing conflicts over territory or resources. Her diplomatic reach extended to the kingdoms of Nubia, Syria, and even parts of Asia Minor, where she used marriage alliances, gifts, and envoys to maintain Egypt's sovereignty. Inside her court, Cleopatra's diplomacy was equally precise. She managed rival factions among her advisors, generals, and even family members, using negotiation and subtle influence to prevent internal power struggles from destabilizing the kingdom. By rewarding loyalty, mediating disputes, and maintaining a network of trusted allies, she kept Egypt politically stable in times when other kingdoms crumbled under similar pressures. Her communication skills were legendary. Cleopatra could adapt her approach depending on her audience, whether addressing Egyptian priests, Greek elites, or foreign emissaries. She understood the nuances of language, persuasion, and perception. Every gesture, word, and meeting was carefully calculated to strengthen her position. Diplomacy in her hands became a tool for projecting power without drawing a sword. Beyond individual negotiations, Cleopatra also shaped the strategic perception of Egypt. She projected the image of a wealthy, sophisticated, and powerful kingdom, making Egypt a desirable partner and a formidable player on the world stage. Through festivals, ceremonies, and symbolic gestures, she reinforced the idea that her rule was stable, her kingdom prosperous, and her influence in the region unshakable. Cleopatra's diplomatic mastery demonstrates that leadership is not measured solely by military might or personal charisma. It is measured by the ability to maintain alliances, influence perceptions, and navigate complex political landscapes. Her success as a diplomat ensured that Egypt remained strong, respected, and independent for decades, a testament to her vision, intelligence, and unparalleled political skill. Economic reforms and stabilization. Egypt's prosperity under Cleopatra. Cleopatra's brilliance extended beyond diplomacy and court politics. She was also a master strategist in economics, understanding that the stability and power of her kingdom depended on the strength of its treasury and the prosperity of its people. Unlike many rulers who relied solely on conquest or taxation, Cleopatra approached economic governance with vision, foresight, and innovation. Egypt, with its fertile Nile Valley, was one of the wealthiest regions in the ancient world, but its resources were vulnerable to mismanagement. Cleopatra recognized that food supply, taxation, and trade were not merely administrative concerns. They were tools of political stability and influence. She embarked on reforms that strengthened the state while fostering prosperity for her subjects. One of her key initiatives was the reorganization of agricultural production and land management. She commissioned surveys of the Nile Delta and other arable lands to identify the most productive areas and ensure that crops were distributed efficiently. Farmers were given incentives to cultivate crops, while officials who had previously exploited peasants were replaced with accountable administrators. By increasing productivity and curbing corruption, Cleopatra guaranteed a reliable grain supply, which not only fed the population but also allowed Egypt to export surplus grain to neighboring regions, enhancing the kingdom's wealth and reputation. Cleopatra also implemented reforms in trade and infrastructure. She invested in the maintenance of canals, ports, and roads, facilitating both internal trade and international commerce. Alexandria, Egypt's bustling capital, became a hub of economic activity, attracting merchants from across the Mediterranean. Cleopatra encouraged the production and export of luxury goods, papyrus, glassware, textiles, and precious metals, ensuring that Egypt remained economically competitive and influential. Currency and taxation were also carefully managed. Cleopatra introduced measures to stabilize the Egyptian coinage, preventing devaluation and fostering confidence in the economy. Taxation policies were restructured to reduce the burden on peasants while ensuring consistent revenue for the state. This careful balancing act not only strengthened the economy but also enhanced her legitimacy, as her subjects saw her as a ruler who governed fairly and effectively. Beyond mere survival, Cleopatra's economic policies projected Egypt as a powerful and self-sufficient kingdom. Her reforms allowed the state to fund military defenses, support monumental construction, and sponsor cultural projects, creating a virtuous cycle of prosperity, security, and prestige. By the time of her later reign, Egypt under Cleopatra was not only politically stable but economically resilient, a kingdom that could withstand external pressures and maintain its independence in a volatile world. Cleopatra's economic foresight demonstrates a rare combination of practical intelligence and visionary leadership. She understood that wealth was not just measured in gold or grain, but in the stability, resilience, and well-being of her kingdom. Her reforms left Egypt prosperous, respected, and positioned to endure, proving that economic mastery was as central to her power as diplomacy or strategy. Cultural integration and religious leadership, uniting a kingdom. Cleopatra understood that ruling Egypt required more than politics, diplomacy, or economic reforms. It required a deep connection to her people, their culture, and their spiritual life. The Ptolemaic dynasty was Greek, yet the majority of the population was Egyptian, steeped in traditions, rituals, and beliefs that predated her family by centuries. Cleopatra's genius was in bridging these worlds, creating unity and loyalty through culture, religion, and symbolism. She presented herself as the living embodiment of the goddess Isis, a central deity in Egyptian religion. In doing so, Cleopatra not only gained the support of the powerful priesthood, but also reinforced her image as a ruler who was divinely sanctioned, legitimate, and protective of Egypt's sacred traditions. Unlike previous Ptolemies, who sometimes relied solely on Greek customs, Cleopatra embraced Egyptian rituals, festivals, and ceremonies, attending temple rites and publicly honoring the gods. This integration of religion into her rule strengthened the bond between the monarchy and the people. At the same time, Cleopatra maintained and celebrated the Greek cultural traditions of her dynasty. She spoke Greek fluently, patronized Greek arts and scholarship, and encouraged intellectual exchange between Greek and Egyptian elites. By honoring both traditions, Cleopatra created a shared cultural space, where Egyptians and Greeks could coexist under her authority, fostering loyalty across diverse communities. Cleopatra also used culture as a tool of political symbolism and international influence. Alexandria, her capital, became a hub of learning, art, and science. Scholars, poets, and scientists from across the Mediterranean were drawn to her court, attracted by her support for knowledge and innovation. Public displays, processions, temple dedications, and architectural projects showcased Egypt's wealth and sophistication, projecting power to both her subjects and foreign nations. Her understanding of religion went beyond performance. She leveraged belief systems as a unifying force. By aligning herself with Egyptian deities and participating in sacred rites, Cleopatra tapped into the collective identity of her people. Egyptians saw her not just as a Greek queen, but as a legitimate, divine ruler who safeguarded their traditions and prosperity. This cultural authority reinforced her political power, creating a sense of continuity and stability in a kingdom that had faced centuries of foreign rule and internal factionalism. Cleopatra's cultural and religious policies reveal a ruler who understood the power of identity, symbolism, and shared values. She transformed Alexandria and Egypt into a kingdom where politics, religion, and culture were intertwined, ensuring loyalty, unity, and respect. By cultivating both Greek and Egyptian traditions, she strengthened her legitimacy, enhanced social cohesion, and projected Egypt's prestige throughout the Mediterranean world. In essence, Cleopatra's cultural leadership was as strategic as her diplomacy or economic management. It created a kingdom that was not only politically stable and economically strong, but also culturally vibrant and spiritually cohesive, leaving a legacy of unity and sophistication that endured long after her reign. Military strategy and defense. The queen as commander. Cleopatra is often remembered for her diplomacy and charisma, but her reign was also marked by strategic military leadership. She understood that Egypt's wealth, culture, and independence could only survive if protected by careful defense planning and calculated military action. Unlike rulers who relied solely on mercenaries or foreign armies, Cleopatra personally oversaw the kingdom's defense, coordinated campaigns, and made critical strategic decisions that extended beyond the battlefield. Cleopatra's approach to military power was pragmatic and innovative. She maintained a well-trained standing army and navy, ensuring that Egypt could respond quickly to threats from neighboring kingdoms or internal uprisings. She also developed defensive fortifications along strategic points, particularly around Alexandria and key trade routes along the Nile, preventing both surprise attacks and incursions by hostile forces. Beyond defense, Cleopatra's military planning included strategic alliances and support networks. She coordinated with neighboring powers when advantageous, used Egypt's resources to fund naval operations, and deployed troops in a manner that balanced risk and reward. Even when avoiding direct combat, Cleopatra's presence as a leader of strategy inspired confidence among generals, soldiers, and citizens alike. Cleopatra also understood the importance of logistics and resource management in warfare. Grain stores, supply lines, and naval maintenance were all overseen with precision. By ensuring that her forces were well-provisioned and equipped, she maximized the effectiveness of Egypt's military without overextending the kingdom's resources. This strategic foresight allowed Egypt to remain a resilient power in a volatile Mediterranean world. Her military acumen extended to psychological strategy as well. Cleopatra used displays of strength and readiness to deter potential aggressors, projecting the image of a kingdom capable of defending itself while discouraging unnecessary conflict. She understood that perception could be as effective as direct engagement, and she leveraged it to maintain both internal stability and external respect. Even when her alliances required cautious engagement in foreign campaigns, Cleopatra coordinated closely with allied generals, provided critical support for their operations, and ensured that Egypt's interests were protected. Her leadership demonstrated that military strategy was not merely about fighting battles. It was about planning, coordination, deterrence, and the intelligent use of resources. Cleopatra's legacy as a military strategist is often overshadowed by tales of romance or diplomacy, but her reign shows a ruler deeply engaged in the art of war, one who balanced defense, planning, and psychological insight. Egypt remained secure, prosperous, and respected under her military leadership, proving that true power combines intellect, foresight, and the courage to act decisively. Dynastic legacy, securing Egypt's future. Cleopatra understood that true power extended beyond the present. It included the careful planning of a dynastic future. From the beginning of her reign, she was acutely aware that Egypt's independence and her family's survival depended on establishing clear succession, protecting her children, and preserving the Ptolemaic line in a volatile world dominated by Rome. Cleopatra took deliberate steps to secure her children's positions as heirs. Her son with Julius Caesar, Ptolemy 15 Caesarion, was officially recognized as co-ruler in Egypt, ensuring that the dynasty maintained both political legitimacy and continuity. By associating her children with the throne during her lifetime, Cleopatra strengthened their claim, signaling to her subjects and to foreign powers that her lineage would continue to govern Egypt. Her strategic foresight also extended to her children with Mark Antony. Cleopatra ensured that each child was positioned with influence, wealth, and security, both as a way to solidify alliances and to maintain Egypt's presence in regional politics. Through education, mentorship, and carefully orchestrated roles, she prepared them for leadership, instilling both political awareness and the skills required to navigate complex diplomatic landscapes. Cleopatra's dynastic planning was not limited to internal affairs. She understood that her children's survival depended on Rome's recognition and the delicate balancing of alliances. By strategically presenting them to Roman leaders and dignitaries, she sought to establish a status that would protect their legitimacy, even in a world increasingly dominated by Roman power. Beyond individual heirs, Cleopatra strengthened the broader Ptolemaic dynasty through selective marriages, co-rulership, and public displays of unity. She emphasized continuity, showing that Egypt's leadership was stable, orderly, and divinely sanctioned. In doing so, She reassured her subjects that the kingdom's sovereignty would endure beyond her own lifetime. Cleopatra's dynastic foresight also reflected her understanding of history and legacy. She knew that dynasties often fell due to weak succession or internal disputes. By actively shaping the future of her family and carefully planning their integration into Egypt's political and cultural systems, she maximized the resilience of her lineage against both internal and external threats. Even as Rome's influence expanded, Cleopatra's efforts ensured that her children were remembered as heirs to a queen who had masterfully combined political acumen, strategic foresight, and maternal guidance. Her focus on dynasty was not merely personal. It was a calculated aspect of governance, ensuring that Egypt's independence, culture, and prestige would endure as long as possible under her lineage. In securing her family, Cleopatra demonstrated a profound understanding that leadership is measured not only by what one achieves in life, but by the structures one leaves behind for the future. Her dynastic legacy remains a testament to her vision, foresight, and unwavering commitment to Egypt's enduring sovereignty. Legacy and enduring influence. The queen who transcended time. Cleopatra's reign ended with the annexation of Egypt by Rome, yet her influence far outlived her mortal life. Her legacy is not merely the story of a powerful queen, but the enduring impact of a ruler who shaped politics, culture, and the perception of female leadership for centuries. Cleopatra's political and strategic influence persisted long after her death. She demonstrated that a ruler, regardless of gender, could exercise authority, intellect, and foresight on the global stage. Her methods of governance, from economic stabilization to cultural integration, served as examples for subsequent leaders who sought to maintain cohesion in complex, multi-ethnic empires. Culturally, Cleopatra left a mark that resonates through history. She promoted arts, scholarship, and architecture, transforming Alexandria into a hub of learning and innovation. By blending Egyptian and Greek traditions, she preserved a unique cultural identity that endured even under Roman rule. Cleopatra's reign reinforced the idea that leadership is not only about conquest or diplomacy, but also about fostering creativity, knowledge, and civic pride. Her influence extended to the way history and myth were shaped. Ancient writers, both Roman and later historians, depicted her as seductive, ambitious, or even manipulative, but Cleopatra's true legacy was far more profound. These portrayals, while often biased, ensured her story would remain vivid in the collective imagination, sparking literature, art, and scholarship for millennia. She became a symbol of power, intelligence, and resilience, inspiring countless works across cultures and eras. Cleopatra's enduring influence also lies in her example as a woman in power. In a world dominated by male rulers, she demonstrated that leadership requires intelligence, courage, and strategic vision, qualities that transcend gender and time. Modern historians increasingly recognize her as a master strategist, economic planner, diplomat, and cultural leader, not merely a figure of legend or romance. Even politically, her strategies influenced the Eastern Mediterranean long after her death. Egypt's culture, institutions, and administration had been strengthened under her rule, and these structures continued to shape governance, commerce, and diplomacy in the region. Her emphasis on long-term planning, economic stability, and cultural unity left lessons that rulers of subsequent centuries would study and emulate. Ultimately, Cleopatra's legacy is a testament to the idea that true leadership is measured by the breadth and durability of one's influence. She preserved her kingdom against powerful empires, nurtured culture and knowledge, secured her family's place in history, and demonstrated the potential of strategic, intelligent governance. Even 2,000 years later, Cleopatra remains a symbol of resilience, intellect, and enduring power, a queen whose story transcends the confines of time, legend, and myth. More than 2,000 years have passed since Cleopatra walked the marble halls of Alexandria, yet her presence has never truly faded. Empires rose and fell, borders shifted, and languages changed, but Cleopatra remains, not as a relic of the ancient world, but as a living idea that continues to shape how we understand power, leadership, and legacy. In today's world, Cleopatra's influence is everywhere. She lives in the conversations about female leadership, where her name stands as proof that intelligence, strategic thinking, and authority are not bound by gender. Modern leaders, political, cultural, and intellectual mirror her understanding that power is not simply seized by force, but earned through vision, adaptability, and mastery of perception. She is present in diplomacy, where alliances are still shaped by timing, communication, and psychology rather than armies alone. Cleopatra understood what modern statesmen now practice: that influence often matters more than dominance, and that the strongest leaders are those who can navigate complexity without losing their identity. Cleopatra also survives in culture. She appears in films, books, art, and music, not because she was beautiful or scandalous, but because she defied expectations. Each generation reshapes her image, revealing more about itself than about her. In a world still fascinated by power and image, Cleopatra reminds us that narratives are weapons, and that controlling one's story can be as important as winning a battle. Even in economics and globalization, her shadow lingers. Cleopatra ruled a crossroads of civilizations, trade routes, and cultures, much like the interconnected world of today. Her ability to balance prosperity, stability, and influence echoes in modern nations navigating global markets and cultural identity. But perhaps Cleopatra's greatest modern presence lies in memory itself. History did not allow her to win, but it refused to let her disappear. Rome conquered Egypt, yet Cleopatra conquered time. She transformed defeat into immortality, choosing dignity over submission, legacy over survival. In doing so, she ensured that her voice would echo far beyond the limits of her reign. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh, but she was also the first of something new. A ruler remembered not only for what she ruled, but for how she ruled. She reminds us that power is temporary, but influence can be eternal. And so, when we speak her name today, we are not just recalling an ancient queen, we are encountering a woman who understood the future before it arrived. Cleopatra does not belong to the past.